Welcome, everybody. This is step 3 on your SEEP program. It's all encompassing the understanding self component of SEEP. So to date, we have at the first live session, we looked at your interest and your strengths. The first recorded session was looking at your values and your values in relation to work, and also your skills, and doing a skills analysis and looking at what future careers may require. So today what we're looking at is very much around personality. So before we start this particular session, you should have completed the type dynamics indicator, which is available on teamfocus.co.uk. If you haven't had the opportunity to do so in advance, I would definitely encourage you to do it after watching this workshop, as it's quite an interesting report. It'll give you a lot more information, and it's something really to add to everything that we've done to date. You'll also need a pen and piece of paper for this particular workshop. So the purpose of this workshop and why we're looking at the type dynamics indicator is really it's to expand on that self-exploration piece, understanding where you fit in a framework that describes personality difference in a very positive and constructive way. So this is really important to remember. It's very positive and it's constructive. You'll also learn to, I suppose, appreciate the important differences between people and how they approach things and approach life, and understand how different types can work together in a complementary way. So you're probably very familiar of working together in groups in college. And sometimes they can be really harmonious, or they can be a place of quite a lot of conflict. And sometimes you may wonder, why do people do things in a certain way? Well, after completing this particular workshop, I think you will have a better understanding of people's personality types and maybe how they approach certain projects. So TDI can be used in several areas. Here it's going to be particularly relevant around developing yourself. So looking at how you problem solve, really important looking how you react under stress, and maybe looking at how you can manage that better. Career development, really important as well. So I'm looking at, well, these are the things I like to do and I do really well, and this is my preference. But a lot of what I do is or where I want to work is develop the areas that I don't like to be in as much, and how you can do that. Also, it will assist you with working with others, so working relationships, your communication style. It has also been used in resolving conflict. And then within organizations, this particular tool has been used around assessing your leadership style, managing change, valuing diversity, and considering team and organizational culture. So it's got a lot of applications, and this tool has been widely used for several years globally. Just to give you a background on the history of this particular tool, so it was first really introduced with the learnings from Carl Jung. He's a Swiss psychologist, and he really developed the whole notion of types. It was then further developed by a mother and daughter group, Myers and Briggs, and they really brought this type psychology together. And developed the tool and really began the research around this. It is probably one of the few models of personality that describe differences positively. So that's one of the really interesting things about this particular tool. So I'm going to kick off with a little exercise. So I'd like you to get out that pen and piece of paper now. And what I would like you to do, and this is really to highlight your your understanding of what is a preference. So first of all, I'd like you to take a few moments and write your name in your dominant hand. So whether that be left or right-handed, I just want you to write your signature. Perfect. I assume most of you have done that at this stage. So now what I would like you to do is write your signature in your less dominant hand, whatever that be, left or right. Perfect. So what was the difference for you all? Well, typical responses when I do this with a class is, well, when I'm writing with my preferred hand, it feels really natural, flowing, and comfortable. Okay, I didn't have to think about it. It was effortless and it was easy. So it's something that was really innate to me. I just did it naturally, distinctive, recognizable. So I know it's my own handwriting and I know it's my own work. I don't have to think about it. Okay, so that's when you're writing with your preferred hand or your dominant hand. Now let's see what the common responses are when you're writing in your non-preferred hand. Okay, a lot of people will say it didn't feel natural. Okay, it was difficult, awkward. I really had to concentrate when I was doing it. It was quite slow. It wasn't fluid. It took more effort and it didn't feel like me. Okay, so it didn't come as naturally as writing with my preferred hand. But, and there is a but to this, it does get easier with practice. Now, will it ever match your dominant hand? How much energy would you have to put into to make it as good as your dominant hand? There's lots of questions there. But I think this exercise really highlights um, the importance of understanding your preferences. So understanding where you naturally fit or what comes to you naturally. What I'd say about this particular workshop as well, when you are approaching the exercises that we're going to start doing now in a couple of minutes, I really want you to take it from a shoes off approach, okay? Because sometimes how we present ourselves at work or in college may not necessarily be the real self. Okay, it could be how we feel we have to behave because of maybe societal norms or culture at work or in college. So I really just want you to take, if your time was your own and you had no demands or constraints by anybody else, where would you naturally go to? Okay. So just something to remember in relation to preference is tells us what we find most energizing and comfortable, okay? We don't even have to think about it. Um, just on this particular assessment as well and the workshop, type is nothing to do with your ability or your skill level, okay? It's just purely based on your preference. Also, there is no such thing as a right or wrong type. Okay, it is what it is. Each type has fantastic strengths and also maybe areas for development or watch out areas. Within this particular tool we're going to talk about, there is 8 preferences and everyone has to use all 8 preferences. Otherwise, we would not be able to, I suppose, operate in the world. But you will have a dominant preference. So within the dichotomies we're going to talk about, there will be one preference that you are naturally more inclined to connect with. And I suppose what with this particular exercise as well is at the end of the day, you are best decided on your own type. Or you may have done the online assessment already, which will give you your reported type, or you may do it after this workshop. And it's really interesting to compare well what the computer says you are as opposed to what you feel you are. And then we do a thing called what's best fit analysis at the end, but I'll talk to you about that. So just to kick off, Like I said, there's 8 preferences, there's 4 dimensions, okay? So the first dimension is really talking about where you get your energy from, and is that, are you an extra, or is that extroversion or introversion? What I would say as well is some of the titles of these particular preferences are misleading. So bear with me as I describe them. Sensing and intuition. So this is, what kind of information do you prefer to use when you're making decisions? Thinking and feeling is, what process do you use when you're making these particular decisions? And judging and perceiving, this is really misleading, but what it's really talking about here is, how do you deal with the world around you? Is that in a very structured way, or do you like to go with the flow? But I'll be describing these in more detail. So I'm going to start with the first one that we're talking about. So it's the extroversion and introversion dimension. So all about where you get your energy from. So you'll see on the screen there's 2 circles, and if you have a preference for extroversion, it's very much that you are in the world, you're giving out energy and you're receiving energy. In the I little circle there, you'll see it's very much internal. Okay, so you receive your energy and give out your energy within yourself. So if I was to describe the characteristics of somebody who has a preference for extroversion, they tend to act before thinking. Um, they prefer to get into action straight away. So they're very much learned through action and doing things. People that tend to act before thinking, they'll often, maybe walk across the room asking you a question about something, but by the time they've got to you, they've solved the problem themselves. So really much learning through action. They talk things through, okay, really happy to discuss things, more expressive when interacting, gain energy from interactions with others. So they're really energized about being out and about with people, meeting people. And they have a breadth of interests, okay? So they really are quite diverse in their interests. If we are talking about the characteristics of somebody who has a preference for introversion, tend to think before they act, so quite considered in their approach, prefer to spend time on reflecting first before acting, okay? So they like to have it all worked out in their head first before testing it in reality. They think things through, okay? So they don't necessarily talk them through, they'll think it through, and then once they have it figured out, they may discuss it with somebody. More contained when interacting, and gain energy from concentration and have a depth of interest. So they may not have the breadth that somebody who has a preference for extroversion, but if they have an interest, it's a deep interest, and they'll know a lot about that particular interest or subjects. So you'll see they're very, very different. Now, it may be really clear for you straight away, and you go, yeah, I'm definitely, at one side of the dichotomy when it comes to extroversion, or I'm at the other side of the dichotomy when it comes to introversion. You'll find that most of us probably sit around the middle somewhere, but you will have a preference, and you need to really reflect and go, God, what is my natural preference? Just to be very mindful, extroversion and introversion has nothing to do with your sociability or your social confidence. Some of the best trainers I know, maybe some of the really strong CEOs where you really are in a front-facing role, have a preference for introversion. Likewise, the opposite for E as well. So be mindful you don't take a negative connotation from the word either. This is a really good analogy here also. So if you were recharging and you're an extrovert, you'd probably be out and about in the world, getting energy. If you were recharging and you are an introvert, you're really sort of need to go within yourself and plug in and withdraw for a while in order to get your energy back. So I have a little exercise for you to do. I'm going to talk you through the instructions here. What you may want to do is pause this video, go do the exercise, and start again. So what I'd like you to do is your ideal work environment. So on a piece of paper, draw your ideal work environment, the setting in which you can be most productive. Now, I said estimated 40 seconds here, but you can choose how long you want to spend at it, okay? And I want you think about it. Okay, what type of environment do you really like to be? Is it an office cubicle by yourself? Is it an open space? Is there a lot of interaction? Is there energy? Is it quiet? Do you answer the phone if it rings, or do you let it go through to voicemail, or do you jump at that interruption? Do you enjoy when people come to your desk to ask you a question, or is it annoying? Do you have an open door policy? So would you really, if when you're studying or you're at work, do you enjoy people coming in and out, and do you enjoy the interruptions? Okay, so consider all of these. Um, what I'm going to do now is, hopefully you've gone and you've done the exercise and you've started back again at the video. But what you will see is people who have a preference for extroversion will normally enjoy a really stimulating, open plan environment where they have the opportunity for discussion. So you'll normally see in their drawings, they're a lot busier with a lot going on and lots of action. For example, here, there may be music, it's open plan, there's a coffee station, there's a couch. Also, what is quite interesting as well is sometimes there will be a connection with the outside world. So somewhere where they're looking at the world going past, whether that be a busy street or a garden, okay? Um, for introversion perspective, it is they normally come back with it's quiet, your own office space to reflect, a feeling of lot of space, and where interruptions are managed. It's not that you don't enjoy the interaction, it's more that they're managed and they happen at a particular time. So you'll see the pictures normally come back where it isn't as busier, there's a lot more space for reflective work, and it's just quieter, and it allows people to take that time to reflect, do their work, and yes, engage, but in a much more controlled and managed way. So what I'd just one more thing before I move on is really maybe what will help you is, well, how do E's and I's approach meetings? From a person who attends a lot of meetings, this is really obvious when you're at a meeting and people's preference. And it's also really obvious how other people's preference can really annoy each other. So if you are an extrovert, you may like to talk things through. So you're quite, you participate a lot in meetings, tend to be expressive, I suppose lose energy when there's little interaction, and may talk over others as well in order to get your point across. If you have a preference for introversion and you're in a meeting or with a group of people, you may like to think things through, tend to be very contained in meetings, lose energy when there's little time for reflection, and you really do wait their turn in conversation. So a very different approach, and you can see how one may frustrate the other if you didn't have an understanding of people's preferences. Now, what I would like you to do is really decide where you sit, or what is your preference. Now, is it, and I'd like you on a piece of paper to write down E or I. Now, you maybe haven't decided yet, and that's okay. You can decide later, but I would like you to really think, well, what is my preference? And I know you can say, well, in certain circumstances, I act like this, and in other circumstances, I act like that. And of course we do. We all have to, because we have to operate in this world, but you will have a preference. So like I said, if there was no constraints or no social norms that you had to conform to, what would your preference be? So write it down on the piece of paper. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to quickly move on to the next dimension, which is sensing and intuition. And this is all about what kind of information do you prefer to use. So the characteristics for sensing are want to know the facts. So if you were looking at a camera here, first of all, start with the image. If you had a preference for sensing, you're really focusing in on that one flower. You know a lot about it. You know the details. You know the specifics. If you have a preference for N, you can see there from the image, it's very much an overview. Okay, you're at the top looking in. So you're looking at everything. You don't necessarily know the details around everything. So the characteristics characteristics can be for an S is you want to know the facts, you look at the specifics, adopt a realistic approach to things, focus on the here and now, and ensure things work in practice. And you collect observations. So everything is very much coming in through your senses. If you have a preference for N, you seek out new ideas. You look at the bigger picture. Adopt a really imaginative approach, and anticipate the future. So you're really looking into the future. Ensure things work in theory, they may not work in practice, and you use conceptual frameworks. Okay, so a bit of that description is quite heavy. I'm going to give you a really simplistic example. So I have two daughters, and last summer they went on a dressmaking course. They're quite young, and they have very different personalities. So after the dressmaking course, they were sitting down with my mother, and she had a sewing machine, and she was sort of going over what they learned in relation to sewing. And my eldest daughter was there, and you could see she had no real interest in knowing how the sewing machine worked. It was sort of like, yeah, move on to the next thing. Where my younger daughter, oh, she just couldn't wait to get at the sewing machine. She was even, her hands were rubbing together as she was looking at the fabric coming through the sewing machine. So she was really mimicking what was to be done. So my older daughter left, and my younger daughter sat in beside my mom, and she began to sew and was really enjoying this process, feeling the fabric, understanding how the machine worked and everything like that. And lo and behold, maybe a half an hour later, my eldest daughter returned, and she had this amazing picture drawn of a beautiful skirt she had designed in her head, and that she wanted to make, but she hadn't thought about how was it going to be done. So between both of them, my younger daughter looked at the picture. It's like, oh, well, we could do it this way because I can do the stitching this way and that way. So between both of them, they achieved a beautiful skirt, but one of them had come up with the idea and big picture and hadn't really thought about the practicalities, where the other one was really understood what needed to be done. And I think that's a really good example of describing the difference between the S and the N. So when they work together, they complement each other. It's fantastic. When they don't work together, it can be quite explosive. So I suppose as well, just to remember, it's nothing to do with being sensitive or intuition or gut feeling. It's very much around the information you take in. I have the next exercise here. What I want you to do is time yourself. I'm going to flick an image up on the screen for 15 seconds. And what I want you to do is write down what you see. Okay, just write it down. So bear with me now. The image is going up on the screen for 15 seconds. And what I would like you to do is write down what you see. Okay. Boom. Okay. So while you're, if you want to pause the video now and write down what you saw and come back, and I'm going to talk you through, I suppose, the outcomes. Okay. So the typical outcomes when we do this in class would be sensing people, or the sensing group will usually give more specific detail of what they saw. The sensing groups are more likely to actually redraw the picture, showing the position of the various elements, and they'll really begin to, I suppose, list an inventory of the objects that they recall. Whereas the intuition group, the ends, I suppose, really begin to talk about the meaning behind the picture and the things it reminded them of. So maybe time slipping away, mortality. They'll start talking about the emotion, the colors, what they signify. So very, very different approaches. One has gone into maybe, I suppose, a real high level of what it means, where and the opposite group are really gone into, well, I saw this and I saw this and I saw this. You will find, if you leave the groups enough, a lot, enough time to really talk about this, they will merge into each other. So the N will begin to describe the objects and vice versa. The S's will begin to describe, I suppose, the meaning, but it's not their first interaction. It's not where they go. So I suppose this is, I love this image. I think this really is a representation of my married life and how we approach IKEA furniture. So if you have a preference for S, you prefer to be given step-by-step realistic instructions. Want to have the specifics spelled out, like instructions to be clear and accurate, may find non-specific instructions to be too vague. Whereas if you have a preference for N and prefer to be given the overall purpose and work it out for yourselves, want to see the big picture, may not notice inaccuracies and are comfortable with ambiguity, and may find detailed instructions really limiting. So back again, which preference do you think fits you best? Okay, so write down on a piece of paper, is it S or N? And again, don't worry if you're unsure, it may become clear to you later, or maybe you just need a little bit more time to observe. So moving along again quickly, we're moving into a different preference called thinking and feeling, and it's what process do you use to make decisions? So is it very much the logic of the head, or are you led by your heart? Okay, so characteristics for T is you apply logical reasoning, use cause and effect analysis, seek objective truth, decide using impersonal criteria, and very much focus on tasks, and you provide critique, okay? And you do that with ease. If you have a preference for feeling, you apply individual values, you understand others' viewpoints, you seek harmony, decide by personal circumstance, and focus on relationship and offer praise and encouragement. So as you can see, two very different approaches or preferences. I think this is a really good analogy and may help you to decide where you sit on that particular dichotomy as well. So you will see here the blue being the thinking preference and the orange be the feeling preference. So the blue, they really have, when they're making decisions, have the ability to step out of the problem and really be objective. So don't get involved in any of the emotion. Don't think of the people involved. Really just think being objective in that situation. Whereas if you have a preference for F, makes decisions by stepping into the problem and being compassionate. So it's all about the people. It's all about how they are feeling. I suppose this is a little exercise you can do as well, and it's called helping a friend. So what I'd like you to do is get your piece of paper back out again. So a friend has called in the middle of night to say the flat has been burgled. How do you approach it? So what I want you to do is ponder and write down your approach to the scenario. What I would say is please don't take any longer than 3 minutes. This is really much going from a gut instinct perspective. So I'd like you to pause the video and do that exercise. And when you have that exercise completed, come back and continue on with the workshop. So I'm going to move on a little bit. What you will find from the previous exercise, what people normally come back is, well, those who have a preference for T go straight into the particulars of the situation. So, have you called the guards? Is the burglar there? What have they taken? Have you contacted the insurance company? And it's a really logical list of things that you would do that are very practical and really relevant in the situation as well. Where if you have a preference for F, what you find is people will say, oh, stay there, I'll be right over. They'll offer you a cup of tea. How are you feeling? And then afterwards, they'll begin to come into, well, have you called the guards? What have they taken, etc. And vice versa for teas as well. That of course they'll ask how you are, but that's not where they'll go straight away. So maybe this will help you as well. So the difference between the helping style. So A T want to help someone by fixing the problem. They tend to look at the practicalities and make a logical analysis of the situation and focus on the task. If you have preference for F, you want to help someone by being empathetic and supportive, and tend to explore how people feel in a situation and really focus on the relationship. So as you can see, very different approaches, and can conflict depending on your type. So again, what I'd like you to do is get that piece of paper out and write down where you think you are you T or you're F? Okay. So moving along, and we're at the last piece of the last set for the dimensions, which is judging and perceiving. And this is very much how you deal with the world around you. And what I would say is actually the one that causes a lot of conflict in groups, in organizations, in life. This one definitely is a hot topic. So as you can see, two different pathways there to the same destination. So the characteristics, if you have a preference for J, it's really that you like to come to closure. You make plans and you stick to those plans. You act in a controlled way. You prefer to act within a structure and prefer to schedule your activities. If you have a preference for P, you keep a range of choices available, so you don't lock yourself down straight away. You remain quite flexible and you can change your direction quite easily. You respond as information is emerging. Oh, that's really interesting. I might try this. Prefer to go with the flow and prefer to be spontaneous. Okay, so there are the differences. This is an illustration and I think it's fantastic. You'll see there the J, very good step-by-step approach, working their way up along until they get the task completed. So it's very systematic, it's very logical, and it's done in a very consistent way. You will see here in the P, so they actually start in the middle, they'll go round a bit, there's a flurry of activity, maybe they'll dip off for a little bit, and whoa, before the deadline, bang, there's a lot of activity. Okay, now one thing I would like to highlight in both, you both reach the deadline. It's just your journey to get there is very, very different, and can be really frustrating depending on which side of the dichotomy you sit on. So what I would like you to do now is write down on a piece of paper how would you organize a holiday. Okay, so again, the same thing applies. Press pause on the video, and once you've it done, I'd really like you to start again. So what you will see here is, I suppose, the approach to the task. So you may see that people who do that particular exercise, the person who has a preference for T, it's very much plan it, it's step by step. They follow a pre-decided plan or method, so they know when they're going, or the plan even goes down to detail of what they're going to do when they go there day by day. They organize at the start and have a very clean structure. If you have a preference for F, you'll say with that particular exercise I got you to do, it's very much, oh, last minute, we'll see where we'll go. Once we land there, we'll make a plan. May or may not have accommodation booked, but that's the enjoyment of it, and you really love that element, the freedom of it. And also, you know, a really good question is, do you know where your passport is? Wait to see what emerges. They respond flexibly in the moment, and they plunge in first, and it works. Work out what needs to be done along the way. Okay, so very different approaches. Again, this is what the same as the last time. What I'd like you to do is write down on a piece of paper where you think your preference lies. So are you a J or are you a P? Okay. So now you're maybe, well, what is all this about? So what I would like you to do, it's called pulling it together and your best fit type. So what I would like you to do is take the letter from each of the exercises we have done, and it will give you a 4-letter type. Okay. And this is the TDI whole type. So you think fits you best. When you do the online report, you will also get a 4-letter code, and that's really what the computer thinks you are. So what I would say is you bring those two together, you see where the differences lie, read a little bit more about the preference and decide where you feel you fit best, okay? If you are unsure of any preference pairs, consider whether there are demands on you to operate differently from your natural preference. Okay, so back to the work environment, we all sometimes feel that we need to act differently at work. There are short descriptors that I'm going to show you in the next slide, but there's a lot more information in that particular report on team focus. So please go and do it and look at it and decide. And what I would do is maybe read around the types and see what resonates with you. And at the end of the day, remember, you know yourself best, okay? So you decide what fits you best. And don't worry if you're still unsure. I still struggle with one in particular. And, you know, it may come more clear when you start to work or as you evolve in your career as well, okay? So using your TDI preference, what does it mean? I suppose now you have a framework for personalities. Now I'll just say it's a framework. It's not a given, okay? So please don't feel you're being pigeonholed into something. This is just purely preferences, and it's like the other tools we've done. It's just self-exploration. It'll give you an insight, I suppose, how to work more effectively with others, but maybe their preference and I suppose how your preferences may work well together, but also how they may clash. Remember, there's no types that are better or worse than others. What I would say, there's a lot of research out there in relation to types and careers, okay? So are certain types suited to better careers? Probably not. May have happened that is people ended up recruiting in okay, and that's how it became. So there's a lot of stuff you can get on the internet. If you just Google MBTI or TDI and careers, it'll bounce back for you. Knowing your TDI preference, I suppose, can really help you to work better with others. It can reduce conflict, improve your communication, and influence strategies, and help you to make better decisions, okay? So they're just a little descriptor thumbnails of what it's like to be a particular type, but there is a lot more detail in the report I've asked you to do. So we've come to the end of our TDI workshop. I hope you found it useful. I find it a really, I suppose, insightful tool, and it's something I did really early on in my career, and I still reference it daily. I'm obviously now licensed to practice, administer these particular tests, but it's very, very interesting. So I would like to, I suppose, now finally say congratulations. You've completed the Understanding Self section of the SEEP. So you've gone through all of the required workshops. What you need to do now is complete a 1,000-word reflection activity, which needs to be submitted with your co-op report, and the details can be found back on your pathway.